this episode of In the House, I speak with Whit Smith of Smith Structural Engineering about concrete in construction and whether or not there are any viable alternative materials. We also speak about the Texas Department of Transportation's forced adoption of Type 1L cement and the liability of using this concrete mix on your project. If you like this episode, be sure to follow the podcast and give it 5 stars. Thanks for listening. Well, today on In the House, I have Whit Smith here with me today with Smith Engineering.
Smith Structural Engineering.
Smith Structural Engineering. And Whit, you're the first engineer I've had on this podcast, so I appreciate you coming on. I'm interested to hear your perspective on things. But
yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on. But I wanted to cover a few things today. First of all, I wanted to get into a little bit of your history and your background, how you found yourself in structural engineering. And then I wanted to talk about part of your job that really gets you excited every day and some things that you do on a day-to-day basis. What's your routine look like? And talk a little bit about what protections you have too as an engineer. I mean, construction is a risky business. So I wanted to dive into that topic a little bit, if we could, about liability and what protections you have. And then lastly, I wanted to, you hear a lot about, new materials that are coming out on the market. And one of the things I hear a lot, is about concrete. Concrete produces a lot of CO2 emissions. And so there's a lot of push to regulate concrete and try to limit the amount of concrete that's used in buildings these days. And so I wanted to get into that and discuss, what are some alternatives to concrete and are they even viable? There's a lot out there and they're shown to be as the new latest and greatest material, but who knows if they're even worth a damn. So that's kind of an outline of what I wanted to talk about today. But Whit, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks for coming on, and I wanted to dive into your background. Give us a brief history, if you can, of you and how you found yourself as a structural engineer.
Yeah. I'll try to be brief.
You're definitely an engineer. You're definitely an engineer because you have 4 pages of notes.
Hey,
there?
No, this is all off the cuff. I'm giving away my secrets here.
Definitely an engineer move. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, there was a few little dates in there that were important to me that I thought were relevant to the conversation and how I got here. So I wanted to make sure I got those pretty close to right.
Yeah.
My first memory of construction is as a child. I was 2 years old, and my dad and my grandpa built the house that I grew up in together. And my dad was working a full-time job. My grandpa came up to help him build this house. And, I don't remember a lot about it, but I was exposed to building at a very early age. My dad got a dual degree from UT in architecture and architectural engineering. It introduced him to what would go on to be some of the best architects in the state. And they struck up a friendship, a respect for one another. And that's relevant to my background because years later, I would be introduced to those same people. And thanks to my dad, they probably gave me more respect than I deserved, that I had earned. So that's a little bit why that matters. But my dad started his firm in 1990 out of a barn at our house, and he worked there for a couple years. And then he went on to lease a space from a local architect named Dick Clark.
Yep.
Dick had a very successful practice here, or Mr. Clark. I didn't know him well. Mr. Clark had a very successful practice here in Austin, and my dad leased a space from him. And at the same time, Jerry Garcia, who was a engineer who founded his own company at that same time called Structures, they shared an office space together. So they officed there for quite a few years. When I was 15 in 1998, I got a job working at a local mechanic about a few doors down from Mr. Clark's office at 4th and Lavaca. So I would ride to work with my dad, I would stop off and, I would mainly clean the shop, clean tools. Eventually, they let me work up to changing oil and basic things like that. But on my lunch break, I would go down and visit in the office with those folks. Once again, I was a young kid. They didn't need to take time out of their day to stop and visit with me, but it was a very welcoming environment. I met a lot of great architects that would go on, many of them to go on their own firms. One of them is a partner at Dick Clark Architecture today. It was a pretty fun time, and it exposed me at that time to a little bit of what was going on. After that, a year later, I was old enough to drive. I got a job working for a local contractor named David Escobedo.
Okay.
He is still very well known in this market today, and he was working on a house that Paul Lamb and my dad had designed together, and it was known as the Mayan House. And it's one of the finest examples of a masonry.
I've seen that
in design. I think
that's
in
gorgeous.
the area. And so the first half of that summer, I worked for Escobedo, and I was essentially a mason's helper. I mean, I went behind the guys and cleaned up. It was really all I did. And it was great exposure. Those were long days for somebody who'd never done it before. Very valuable experience. And the second half of the summer, they were beginning a new project out towards Hamilton Pool that had a large excavation to start the site. And they had a big excavator out there, a track excavator, a 963, and a small 12-yard dump truck, and they needed somebody to run the dump truck. And it was just moving material within the same property. So they let me have that job. They took a little pity on me and gave me that job. So that was the second half of that summer. But once again, it was a unique perspective into construction. I was beginning to learn a little bit about it, more so than most 16-year-olds. And then a year later, in 2000, we had a 2,000 square foot horse barn that my dad had built 18 years prior out of cedar, locally harvested cedar. And this will tell you a little bit about how my dad feels about wood construction. We feel about it differently. He was so disappointed that he built that barn out of wood. We tore it down and rebuilt it out of steel. We poured a slab-on-grade foundation that he and I formed up. I think actually David Escobedo, I believe, sent some finishers out to help us finish it.
Nice.
And then we had a steel frame barn that we built together. So that was that summer. And then the following summer in 2001, before I went off to college, I was working as a surveyor for Jimmy Evans, the site work contractor. They're still here. Big name.
Okay. Yeah.
And surveyor is a misleading term. What we were really doing was setting blue tops for pads, mostly apartments. So we were on sledgehammers all day long.
What's a blue top?
A blue top is a marker that the guys on the blades come in and use to fine tune their elevations on the building pads.
Okay.
So one guy's on a transit, other guy's on the stick, on the rod, and one guy's setting blue tops. And it's a little wooden peg with a blue fan that sticks out of the top, and that's where it gets its name.
Okay.
And it's so it's really not surveying in the sense that you think of surveying, but that's what we were called, these 3-man crews.
Yeah. And
one guy would be setting blue tops, the other's on the rod. You switch about every 20 minutes. And those were hot days out on those limestone pads.
Yeah,
and
I can imagine.
Back then, we were working 55-hour weeks. It was 5 10s and 1 5 on Saturday.
Wow.
And I was lucky I only had to do it for 2 months because, by the end of it, you get used to it and you like it. But it was, those were long days, hot summers.
Yeah.
So around that time, I was enjoying what I was doing. We were doing construction, some type of construction, and making pretty decent money for a high school kid. And but it came time to go to college, and my parents felt very strongly that I should go to college.
Yeah.
And I was perfectly happy doing what I was doing. And as you would guess, I lost that argument. I was told I was going to college and didn't know what I wanted to do. And my dad suggested that I try civil engineering, which is structural, is a discipline, a subdiscipline of civil. And he suggested I try that. If I don't like it, change career paths, degree paths. And that's how I ended up in college at Texas Tech studying civil engineering. And after the first year, I liked it. Came home. I was a welder that next summer. I was taking summer school and self-employed building pipe fence for some local farmer, rancher.
Yep.
And that took up most of that summer. And then the following summer in 2003, I stayed behind in Lubbock, took summer school and got a job at a lumber yard, a Sutherland's that had just opened there.
Okay.
And was working in the lumber yard. And I really liked that job. I mean, it was fun. Had great time with my colleagues. I like wood. I like framing. It was a good time. I wasn't making a lot of money doing it, but we were enjoying it. 2004, the next summer, I interned for my dad's company as a structural, EIT. Mm-hmm. I wasn't an EIT at that time. You have to have your degree and pass a test. So I was just an intern. And then in 2005, I started for my dad full time.
Okay.
And so that was kind of my background. Even at that time, I wasn't sure I wanted to go into engineering. I still really had a passion for building.
Yeah.
Those first few years were tough on me to be at a desk.
Yeah.
It's not something you think about when you go get your first job.
Mm-hmm.
At least I didn't. And to this day, whenever I interview someone or talk to them about what it is that I do, I ask them how comfortable they are sitting at a desk 8 hours a day. Mm. It sounds like a really dumb question, but for a young guy who was full of energy, used to being on his feet, working with his hands, being out in the heat, it was a real change of pace that I just didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
And so that took some getting used to. Eventually I did. I kind of settled in. As a young engineer, you're not going to be on a lot of job sites. You're not going to be in a lot of meetings. You get a project assigned to you, and that's kind of your day. You sit there and grind away on your project. Mm-hmm. What I didn't know to appreciate at the time was the quality of projects we were working on.
Yeah.
This was 2005, 6, 7. We were working with some of the best architects in the state.
Yeah. I mean, you're going through your background. I mean, you threw out some big names. I mean, Paul Lamb and, David Escobedo. Those are big time here in Austin, or even in the state of Texas. I mean, those are really well-renowned architect, builder. Dick Clark and Associates. I mean, those guys, very, very well renowned here in the state of Texas. So
yeah,
that's great exposure that you got introduced to those guys very early on.
Well, I didn't know to appreciate it.
Sure,
I know to appreciate it now. I didn't know it at the time, and the same was true about the projects we were working on. It was just really an all-star lineup of architects in Austin. Many of them are still around. Many of them, their practices have grown, gone on, added partners. Some have passed away. But it was a fun time, and we were working on some really neat projects.
Well, so if you can briefly, tell me, what does your daily routine look like? I mean, what are some things some tasks that you perform on a daily basis?
Yeah, when I started taking on more of a management role, that's something else I did different from a lot of the other offices that I had grown up knowing. Most of these offices, the engineers, even the principals and the managers still take on a lot of their own projects. They're the lead designer on a lot of their own projects.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find a way to manage that and make it work. It was dividing my attention too much, and I didn't feel like I was doing a good job with that. So I pretty much, unless it was a very small project, I pretty much stopped doing any of my own designs. Mm-hmm. So I would assign all the projects to an engineer in the office. And so I wasn't doing really any submittal review or anything like that. So mostly what my day consists of now, new projects. When new inquiries come through the office, I try to find out if we're a good fit, if we have room in the schedule. I'll write a proposal. Mentorship, I still work with our team's pretty experienced, but there's still always somebody, we're trying to figure out a new way to do something or how our office likes to do something. So there's, a fair amount of that. Any chance I get, I'm out in the field. That's partly self-serving. I just like getting out and, I'm still a wannabe builder. I like to get out and talk to the guys and see how things are going. And, a lot of we don't do any business development. I don't market. I don't go out on, the social scene. It's not something I'm good at. But I do try to get out in the field and keep in touch with all of our guys and find out what's working for them and what's not. Are they happy with the product we're putting out there?
Sure.
Finding out what new trends are. It's how I keep track of material costs. A lot of our projects in early preliminary design start with, we have these 3 foundation types. How much do they cost? And I'm pretty current on foundation costs, not so much framing, but every time I go out for a rebar inspection, I check with the guys to see about what the price per square foot was for the project,
right?
What a yard of concrete cost, those types of things, because it comes up often.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing and the most important thing that I do is peer review our projects before they go out. And that's, I kind of have to go in the office, shut the door, and really focus, because that really is the most important part of my day. And that's the last chance I get to do any quality control, look for anything that might have been overlooked by our team or the whole team, and then we seal the project and send it out the door and hopefully see it get built.
Yeah, hopefully so.
Yeah.
Well, so as I alluded to earlier, I mean, construction obviously it's a very risky business. There's a lot of money involved, especially with these high-end residential projects or even big commercial jobs, high-rise buildings. Like you're talking a lot of risk, a lot of liability. So I guess my first question is kind of two parts, but you deal strictly more on the residential side, correct? Or do you do both commercial and residential?
Yeah, our work's actually about 50% commercial and 50% residential.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So what are your biggest liabilities, and then what protects you? What protections are there in place to protect you?
A couple things about that. I mean, anytime we have professional liability insurance, that's errors and omissions, and that covers anything that we mess up. If we design something wrong, I can give you an example. We had to make a claim a few years ago.
Yeah.
Working down for a college in Houston, someone we worked for 10 years, and they were replacing all their equipment and building a new central plant. Historically, we had set all of their equipment in the 100-year floodplain. So everything was established just above the 100-year floodplain.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they decided to take a new approach and set everything in the 500-year floodplain.
Mm-hmm.
And we had worked down there for so long on so many of the same kind of projects. We had standard detailing for this particular client. And we went through and started, setting up our foundations, building the central plant, which is a central plant in this case. Well, this one was the equipment outside. So big chillers within a CMU wall, a big courtyard, essentially, to hide all the equipment. And we set all of our foundations in the 100-year floodplain. And it was just a mistake on our part. And so we had to file a claim to go in and lift that equipment up. It wasn't a lot, lift it up 12 inches or so to get it up to the 500-year floodplain. And so, we designed some steel pedestals for all the equipment. They all have a big steel base. We bolt them down to these concrete pads, lift the whole thing up. And, so luckily we have insurance for that. Otherwise, that cost would have come out of our pocket. And that's just an example of an error on our part. And we try really, really hard to not let that happen.
Yeah.
We do a pretty good job of not letting it happen, but that one fell through the cracks. So that's one layer of protection that we have. We have a general liability policy. But one more thing related to that. Every time we renew our policy each year, I talk to our agent and I say, so what are the trends that you're seeing among the market?
Yeah.
They're almost always soil related or foundation related. Not always, but by and large. So I'm told that geotechnical and structural have by far the most claims compared to all the other disciplines and professions.
Okay.
And usually soil foundation type related.
Yeah.
So that's always interesting to me. What I do outside of that, so that's your traditional, how do we protect the company? Well, let's get insurance policies.
Sure.
What I do is I almost never work for anybody I don't know. So if a project comes along, that's not to say we don't take on, new clients, but I have to, it has to be somebody that I was introduced to on a project through a mutual acquaintance or someone else that I know and trust.
Yeah.
Or somebody that comes highly, highly recommended who I already knew who they were. So this is a luxury we've had over the last 10 years. The Austin market's been strong. There's plenty of work to go around. We've been approached by lots of people who I suspect were very good to work for, but we had our core group. I'm very reluctant to branch outside of our core group that we work for.
Yeah.
Because I know I just have so much confidence in their ability. They look out for me and I look out for them, and it's really served us well. So how do I manage risk? The best thing I can say is work for people you know and trust.
Yeah.
And it takes a while to develop that,
Sure.
that group. So you're going to have to go out and take a few chances on people, and some are going to work and some aren't. But we've been very, very fortunate to be in a position where we get to work with who I consider to be the best builders and the best architects and the best subcontractors in Central Texas, if not in the state.
Yeah. So kind of a side question here that I just thought of, but when you hear on the news about, like a building collapse or some kind of catastrophic failure, what goes through your mind, I guess, when you see something like that? Like, what are some of the steps that, happen after a catastrophic failure? I know there's a big investigation and all that, but yeah, like, I don't know. What are your thoughts, like, when you see a building, something like that?
I don't think about it for about 3 months, 4 months. I let it settle down.
Yeah.
I let the dust clear. I let people go in and investigate it. Oftentimes these failures, almost always, they're on projects that I don't have a lot of experience with, like large bridges,
Sure. Okay.
pre-stressed, or post-tension bridges, things I don't really work on.
Yeah.
Even these multi-story pre-stressed concrete buildings, you'll see a collapse. Not often, but there was one.
It's very rare, ago. But it does happen every now and then.
And it's not something I know a lot about, and there's always a lot of hysteria surrounding them. And I know before much longer, I'm going to be at a continuing education seminar, and it's going to be one of the options to sit down and hear about. So I wait for it. I don't get too worked up by them. Now, what I really like, I don't like. They're tragedies. What I'm really interested in is seeing the aftermath of a storm, a weather event, or just an accident. If something gets overloaded unintentionally, it's always really interesting to me to see how things fare, let's say in a hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
You can learn so much from it. You're going to see a lot of the same failures over and over and over. You're going to see a lot of metal buildings, maybe like light gauge or pre-engineered metal buildings. This is not by any means a knock on pre-engineered metal buildings. I think they're great. We work on them routinely.
Yeah.
But they require that the bracing be done really well.
Mm-hmm.
You can't forget your bridging on your purlins, because they become unstable. I think that probably contributes to a lot of those failures. But frequently you're going to see metal buildings have failures. You're going to see a lot of cladding, a lot of masonry veneer pulled off buildings. You're going to see a lot of awnings ripped off buildings, a lot of roofs peeled back. All of this, I tell young engineers that they should be really interested in it, because this is all helping to develop a professional judgment, which is so often talked about and never defined or explained how to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So you ask an old engineer of the situation on how to handle it, they give you a reply, and you say, "How do you know that?" And they say, "Well, that's just judgment. I've seen a lot of it."
Yeah.
So the only way to get that is to go out there and look for it,
mm-hmm.
and you're not going to get a lot of opportunities to go see failures like that unless you just happen to be in that line of work.
Sure.
In 2000, when did Ike come through? I forget now. In 2010, maybe Ike came through. Hurricane Ike down in Galveston. There was a local electrical contractor, a big group based here out of Austin. They got hired to go down and set temporary power up for the whole island and a lot of other essential facilities in the area. And they wanted to bring with them a roofer and a structural engineer. And I got picked up for the job.
Wow.
And they just thought it would be a good people to have on the team to go in and look for safety concerns as they're setting up their crews in these particular facilities. So we were the first group. I remember pulling up. They had the island barricaded off. We were the first group to go in the island, and power's off. It's all dark. Well, it was daylight at the time, but just completely deserted. Everybody, they had everybody evacuated. So there was so much to see.
That's crazy.
It was a great exposure for a young engineer to go out and get to see that. And as it turned out, there was very little for me to do engineering-wise, and that we ended up setting up a fuel station and fueling trucks that were going out and refilling the generators all day. And I was down there for a week or 10 days. And, once again, I got to pretend I was a contractor for a day, for a little while.
Yeah.
There was no fuel tank, so they sent us a fuel tank. I was with electricians. They didn't know anything about welding. As it turns out, I did. So we set up all these fuel tanks, installed the pumps on them, got everything up and running, and, I got away from my desk for a little while. Got to feel like I was doing real work, and learned something while I was at it. So it was a good experience for me.
That's wild. Yeah. Do you ever get to be involved in, if there is a not a catastrophic failure, but if there is a failure of some regard, you get involved in the investigation of it?
We don't do that. That'd be a forensics engineer who does that.
Okay.
Local names would be like Whit or Nelson, forensic engineers.
Okay.
So In fact, we office in Nelson's down the hall from us. So once again, I get to be exposed to a little bit of what they do. But we do mostly new designs, and we produce plans.
Okay.
Those guys do investigations, and they produce reports. And I see the reports they produce, and I have no interest in doing that.
Really?
I mean, these are large volumes with tons of information.
Wow.
And it's not something I'm good at. I'm good at writing brief reports. These guys write very large reports that get used, any number of ways. Insurance claims, lawsuits. Those guys are in the courtroom from time to time.
Yep.
And that's a place I just assume not enter if I can avoid it.
I agree. Absolutely.
So,
well, I wanted to go back to what you said, kind of as a segue into the next topic. But, you had mentioned that whenever you go to renew your insurance policy every year, some of the, I guess you were saying some of the biggest claims have to do with soils and foundations. So I wanted to get into this topic of concrete in construction, and we use concrete very heavily, as our foundations. And I'm a big proponent of that. I know you are as well. It's tested and proven. It's a very durable, reliable material. We know what it's going to do and how it's going to react in any given environment. But you see a lot of push nowadays to try to, reduce the amount of concrete that's used in construction and maybe try to use some other material that's quote unquote renewable or green. So some of the examples that I've found just, online were things like mycelium bricks and hempcrete and other things. And I wanted to get your take on if you have heard of any replacements to concrete and if they are indeed viable. Like, would you see them as a viable replacement to concrete?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And probably one I'm going to have a hard time answering.
Yeah.
No, I can answer it just fine. I think concrete's a wonderful material.
Yes.
As far as its impact on the environment, that's a tough one to answer because there's a lot of conflicting information out there about it. I have some personal opinions about it, but they're nothing more than that. So as far as concrete as a building material, it's one of the best we have available to us. I think I mentioned earlier, I really, really like working with wood. I mean, wood it's a wonderful building material. I like the look of it, the smell of it. I like the versatility of it. But there's no replacement for concrete, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's the most widely used building material in the world. It's just so durable. It holds up in so many different climates, saltwater, coastal, cold climate, wet. I mean, you name it. It's just so versatile. And then it's very, very strong. So some of these products that you mentioned, like hempcrete, for example, it's not something I know a lot about because I don't really have any practical use for it.
Sure.
It's essentially non-structural as I understand it, but it is a straw mass pulp type.
Yeah.
Product
So the way I understand, I don't mean to cut you off, but like hempcrete to me is kind of a misnomer. It's not an actual replacement to concrete, even though that's how they make it seem. They use this lime binder to hold hemp straw together, like it's a replacement to concrete. But to me, it's really not. It's more of an insulating material. You can fill your wall cavities with it, or have a rigid panel that goes on the exterior of your building. So maybe in that application, it might be viable, but you see it a lot as marketed as a replacement to concrete, and I just don't. To me, that doesn't seem right.
I see it used for walls. I wouldn't even say often. When I see it used, it is used for walls, often non-load bearing walls. So it might be some kind of a post and beam type construction or just a partition. I would agree with the thought that it's probably a good insulator. Mm-hmm. I don't see it having any role in a true structural system of any kind. Maybe if you were building a very small structure with very light loads, you might
like a shed.
Yeah, a shed, a small house, a cabin.
Yeah.
There might be a good use for it. as you mentioned earlier, I'm not an early adopter of anything,
Mm-hmm.
and that's true of most engineers. You're going to find that something has to be proven and proven and proven
time and time again
before we're going
because
to
there's a lot of risk.
Well, there's risk, and the people we work for have very high expectations for performance.
Absolutely.
And understandably so, and I'm not going to deliver to them something they're going to have problems with 10, 15, 20 years later.
Yep. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I want to take a moment to tell you about my sponsor, U.S. Lumber Brokers. For the past 17 years, U.S. Lumber Brokers has brought premium quality building material to the Austin market while providing an excellent architectural sales experience. If you need help finding the right material for your next project, give them a call at 512-927-1111, email to sales@uslumberbrokers.com, or visit their website to get started today.
So I'm interested in these things. It's a hobby of mine. I've read trade magazines from the time I was in high school. I mean, I was a dork. I'm still a dork. I just read them online now, or watch their YouTube videos, or listen to their podcast. When I was in high school, I subscribed to Journal of Light Construction, and I read every article that came out of it, and I still enjoy that publication. I read it online now.
Yep.
But with that said, if somebody wants to tell me, this has happened often, they call our office and they're interested in building a straw bale house. As politely as I can, we part ways. As quickly and as politely as I can, we part ways, because I have no use for a straw bale house.
Yeah.
If they want to go do it, fine. They might get 15, 20 years out of it. I'm sure there's some that have lasted longer. I don't see that as being a viable building product.
Yeah. Some
of these, kind of the same. I think there's certainly good reason to pursue the development of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun to see what comes on the market. I just don't see it in my day-to-day job. I don't see a real practical use for it. Now, let's talk about another example that is a little closer. I don't know for how long we've been seeing this now. A few years, there has been they've been using Type 1L cement. And that's typically in a concrete mix, you're going to see Type 1, Type 2 cement. This is a push to reduce carbon footprint of concrete.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the TxDOTs, ours is TxDOT, a lot of the DOTs have adopted this in order to see less carbon, go into their projects. Type 1L cement is cement that has had 5 to 15% of the actual clinker. Clinker is the limestone that's heated up. That's where so much energy goes in. They grind it into a fine powder. That's cement. Well, they take 5 to 15%. So let's just call it 10%. They take 10% of the cement and replace it with limestone powder, essentially.
Sure.
So, I mean, to me, that's a huge red flag. Like, I don't want that anywhere near my project.
Yeah.
So if they say, hey, we've got this great idea, we're going to cut our carbon footprint, we're just going to use less cement in your job. I'm like, well, who thought this was a good idea?
Yeah.
Well, apparently everybody but me, because it's very widely accepted now.
Well, why wouldn't you use it?
Well, I'm going to give you a good example. And this is actually how I found out about it.
Okay.
So all the plants are transitioning to this Type 1L cement. They don't have lots of silos out there to hold up various types of cement. So they're going to dump all their Type 1. They want to get the next highway job. They're going to put in their Type 1L. And that's what they're going to start producing.
And that's driven by the state, right? The state is saying, hey, you need to have this type of cement in order to do freeways, right, or roads in the state of Texas.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Full disclosure, I don't do any work in that market.
Yep.
I'm not familiar with their contracts, so I could be totally wrong about that.
Okay.
But this is what I have been told. On most of our projects, we get materials testing. So we pour a big foundation. The contractor or the testing lab comes out and pulls cylinders. It's a quality control where they take them back to the lab. They let them cure following a certain process. Then at 7 days, they break a set. Again, at 28 days, they break a set. And then they hold an extra cylinder for a 56-day break if they need it. The idea is that they're not going to need it.
Yeah.
Almost never. I mean, in fact, people call all the time and say, Whit, do I really need to pull cylinders on this job? Well, so infrequently do we ever have an issue that, I tell them they should, but we try to have a reasonable conversation to explain why we do it.
Yeah.
You can always pull cylinders after the fact. If you have a foundation with issues, you can go in and pull cores and still take them.
Yeah.
So there's other options. So I just try to explain to them what options are available to them. most of the people I work for, like I say, we work for such good builders. Most of them do it just because they want to maintain their high level of quality control.
Yeah.
Once every 3 or 4 years, we might get low breaks. Here last year, we had just 6 months of low break, low break, low break. Some so bad, we had to tear out a whole foundation on a big house for a family that everybody listening to this podcast would know who they are. I mean, this was a big project. You know, everybody was really trying to do their best on it.
I think I know who you're talking about.
And we got the breaks, and they came back at 1,500 PSI.
Really?
You know,
And this was that concrete you're talking about.
yes. So we're like, what in the world is going on? So we start looking around. We say, what is type 1L anyway? You know, I wasn't aware of it at the time. Before we approve a concrete submittal, they send us the mix they plan to use. They give us their history with it, you know, their recent breaks, and we approve it. And in a typical home, we're going to use 3,000 to 4,000 PSI concrete, and that's going to be a 4.5 to a 5 sack mix of, you know, cement.
Right.
Will go per yard of concrete. Something we're all very familiar with. We started getting these very low breaks with this type 1L cement, and we start looking into it, and we find out type 1L cement is nothing more than a mix that has had 10% of their cement pulled out of it and replaced with limestone. So once again, not an early adopter here. You know, I take this stuff seriously. I don't want to see any problems on our projects. You know, I was just blown away by it.
Yeah.
You know, what we started seeing, an immediate response to this, and I don't know if people are still doing it. I haven't seen it. I couldn't tell you over the last few months. We started getting 2 submittals on our projects. One would be, hey, here's our, you know, we don't know where we're getting concrete, you know, next Thursday. That's when we want to pour. We're talking to 2 different plants. We're going to see what they have available. One of them is going to send you a type 1 mix. The other one's using type 1L. Okay. So we review these reports. Well, the type 1, you know, a 5 sack mix, 4,000 PSI concrete, and the type 1L, their 4,000 PSI concrete is a 6.5 sack mix.
Yeah.
I can't tell you if that's an overreaction because they were having problems too, or if that's what they're having to do in order to get the 4,000 PSI concrete.
Yeah.
My hunch is it's the latter. You know, they're just not getting the same strength. So you end up using the same amount of cement, you know, and you have the same carbon footprint.
Right.
Now, it'll be interesting. Good luck looking this up online. There's nothing about it. Because I thought for sure I would find a million discussion forums with people having the same problems, and there's nothing out there. All it is talking about how wonderful it is.
Of course.
So I'm a huge skeptic. It's here to stay as far as was what I understand. So in the meantime, I make it very clear to our concrete suppliers, if this is what we have on our job, we're going to be pulling cylinders, adjust accordingly. You know, you guys do what you need to do.
Is this being used in, well, I guess it was used in house foundation, but what do you do from a design standpoint if you're now being forced to use this concrete that's, you know, of lesser quality, right? Less strength. What did you make concrete foundations thicker? Are they more heavily reinforced? I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, you're going to love this answer, Lonnie. That's your problem. I say, Lonnie, we got this job coming up. I want 4,000 PSI concrete. Go ahead and make that happen.
Great.
And when it doesn't, you're going to say, hey, Whit, here's what I'm planning on building, and I'm going to review it. And I say, this looks pretty good. Go ahead and pull those cylinders, and let's make sure. And then when you know, if we come back with low breaks, you say, you get your testing reports, you send them to me, and you say, Whit, we had a few come back at 2,800, and you asked for 4,000. You know, it's 7 day. We were hoping to start framing on this thing on Monday. What do you want me to do? And then you and I have this happens. It hasn't happened this year. It happened a lot last year.
Great.
I'd say, well, here's our options. We can, they're projecting your next set of breaks at 28 day to be 3,500, 3,700. You know, that's still above the industry standard for a typical slab on grade. You know, we were running about 3,000. Maybe for this particular project, we were really wanting to be cautious with it, and we used 4,000, or maybe it had some elevated slabs or something. At that point, you make a decision on whether or not you want to take a risk and move ahead, hoping you're going to get this 28-day break. Mm-hmm. And truthfully, you know, as far as I'm concerned, at the end of the day, we want 4,000 PSI concrete. So if we have to wait on the 56-day break to get there, fine. So you have to decide, well, I'm going to move ahead with this. I'm going to go ahead and start framing, and we'll see what 28 looks like. Well, we get 28, and you say, hey, we got 3850, you know, on average. Well, if you really pick through the code, they count that as being I can't tell you all the specifics of it. We've done it a few times now. to where that meets the minimum criteria that they're hoping to achieve within certain ranges.
Yeah.
But as you know, we work for a very discerning clientele, and if they find out they're getting 3850 and they wanted 4,000, they're going to want an explanation on. You talk me through this. Did we get what we need? Are we happy with this? And then there's that conversation that none of us ever want to have.
Yeah.
So, and then the other part is sometimes 28-day we're still low, and then we're waiting on 56. Meanwhile, the builder's trying to decide if they're going to move on to their next phase. Yeah. What do I need to do? Oftentimes you're coming back to me saying, is this going to be okay or not? And so this is the conversation we have. And this is why it's good that we're all on a team together, because if it wasn't a team environment, I can tell you that the engineer would throw their hands up and walk away from it and say, not my problem, figure it out. And the builder wouldn't be getting the advice that they need to get. So I feel like I owe you that. You're saying, what are my risks? Help me understand the situation so I know how to proceed. We work through it together. And with the one exception, they've all worked out okay. But it's still no fun. It's not it's another layer of stress that you don't need. You've already got a full plate. So
yeah. How do you tackle that problem?
Yep.
That definitely keeps you up at night.
Back to the question though, let's say you don't like concrete, it is an energy intensive material.
Sure.
We have clients who come to us and say they're very environmentally minded.
Okay.
That this is something that's important to them. They've got a home in a sensitive site with trees, water features, things that they don't want to disturb. Like I said, I still love wood as a building material. It's not right for every situation, but I don't think there's anything wrong with a pier and beam home.
Sure.
I really like pier and beam homes. They've got a real charm about them. The use of wood and exposing it creates just an experience in a home that is different than concrete.
Yeah.
You get up in the morning or you walk out on a deck. Like I said, I'm still partial to decks. I love building a deck. Everybody loves sitting on a deck under a tree, enjoying a cool breeze, and it's just different than sitting on a slab under a tree and enjoying a cool breeze. They're still pleasant, but there's just something about a really nice wood deck that's so enjoyable. So for somebody who really doesn't like concrete, that's an alternative I always bring up that I think is a very viable one.
Which that certainly reduces the concrete, but I guess you still you pour footings, some kind of spread footing, right?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it's still used. Have you ever had anybody? I saw something recently. There was a foundation or a home built that had zero concrete. Supposedly, it was just pier and beam, but it was all just compacted rock.
We've built those. Not many, because as an engineer, I try real hard to get them to throw a little concrete in there. And in fact, I can almost see this home from where I live. Well, one of my neighbors, he's lived there his whole life. Sold a little piece of his property. Took the proceeds and wanted to build his forever home, and this just goes to show you I don't have a project type or a standard. I'm here to help people build projects because I'm a frugal engineer and I DIY anything in my life that I can DIY.
Yeah.
And this is what this guy was doing. He came to me and said, "Whit, I've got all these old telephone poles out here. I want to build a pier and beam house." And I said, "Okay, you don't want to use those old telephone poles. We're going to get you some new wood. You're really going to like it." Nope. I mean, he wasn't having it.
Yeah.
And the truth is, these things had plenty of strength for what he wanted to do. And I said, "All right, we're going to pour some little concrete pads. We're going to set your telephone poles on them." Nope. I'm going to dig a post hole and I'm going to set them in the post hole. And so, I hope not many people come to me asking me to do this.
Yeah.
Like I said, I know the region well. I knew this individual well.
Right.
I knew he wasn't going to come back, 20 years from now and ask me what I had done to him. So he built that home, dug every hole, set a 2-3 feet down, set a post in it.
Wow.
And built on top of it. And by the way, there's a many homes in Austin built on cedar post pier foundations.
Absolutely.
And to this day, it's not at all uncommon for me to crawl under a house. And I mean, in fact, I anticipate it. We crawl down there and it's a cedar post sitting on the ground. And these homes are 100 years old now.
Yeah.
And they perform very well.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It really is wild. Like when you compare homes built, back early 1900s versus now. And it's just, it's wild. I mean, the energy, obviously it's not a comfortable home maybe, but yeah, the way they built it was just I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it just stands the test of time because, the way they built it, it shed water, but it also, if it got wet, it dried out. It was no big deal. And the material they used is not this. It's that old growth timber that just it's a lot more durable than the framing lumber you might see off the shelf and these days, and it's just a lot more durable. Huge respect for the way they used to build.
Yeah. No, I enjoy working on them. As you said, they're uninsulated homes for the most part. Most of them nowadays have had their roof insulated or their ceiling.
Yeah.
But it's fun to see, once again, those homes were built with nothing more than a 2x4. If you see a 2x6, it would shock me on those jobs. Occasionally, you'll see a 1x6 ridge. But, nowadays, you wouldn't dream of building a home with nothing, with rafters with 2x4s, for example. But they performed really well for a long time. Many of them are still performing well.
Yeah. So. Well, there was another product that I saw. We talked a little bit about hempcrete, and I don't see it as a viable replacement to concrete. But there was one that I got kind of a laugh out of, which was the mycelium bricks, which I think is supposed to be a replacement to, CMU block, the concrete masonry units. So mycelium, for people listening, is essentially mold, or not mold, but it's like a root structure from fungi. And so they basically, what they do is they take wood particles and they introduce this fungi, and it grows this mycelium structure, this root structure, and then they take that and compress it into a brick, and there you have it. You have a mycelium brick.
I would want to know how long it takes to produce a brick. Now, that sounds like a long,
slow It did seem expensive.
And probably expensive.
Yeah.
Cost, I wouldn't immediately discount something on account of cost.
Sure.
However, it's very important.
I understand.
We need to be able to produce these in large volumes.
Yeah.
And somewhat quickly. Because these days, one of the most important factors, especially on a large home, if working in the residential market, is, and perhaps they have these in a warehouse somewhere, I don't know. They need to produce them quickly. If you wanted to build a large home, and you need a large volume of these, they better have a bunch somewhere that are available.
Yeah.
And that sounds to me like a product that takes, it's maybe
time.
A smaller operation, maybe it takes a long time to produce them. So I don't know. If I'm wrong about it, and there's a ton of them out there, I'd look into it.
Yeah.
But just growing a brick out of organic matter sounds like it's going to take a while.
It sounds risky. I want to know, Whit, if you were to design and build your own house, how would you build it?
Though I can tell you, I've had 2 houses, and I hope to build I don't own 2 houses now. My first house I built myself, and I built it out of SIPS panels. I didn't include that in my little intro about my
That's
background.
Cool, yeah.
So in addition to being a young engineer, this is partly why I didn't know what was going on in the world. Every waking moment, if I wasn't at the office working, I was at home building my own house.
Yeah.
It was a small house. It was only 800 square feet. But I poured the foundation myself. I ordered a SIPS package for it. I had to do a little steel fabrication to support, like the ridge for all the SIPS panels and those kind of things.
So SIPS is structurally insulated panels. That's what SIP is what we're talking about.
That's correct. And that's essentially a foam panel with OSB. That's like a plywood product glued to each face. And it creates this big rigid panel. And there are no studs, which would be a thermal break in the wall panel. So it's supposedly a very well insulated panel.
Yeah.
So I built that thinking I could do it faster. I was by myself doing most of this. The occasional friend would show up to help me when I needed them. But I thought, well, shoot, I can buy this kit of parts. They're going to deliver it to me, and I'm gonna have a shell of a house in no time.
Yeah.
And it turned out that wasn't the case for me. So I framed the shell. It took me 2 full weekends with several friends there, and then I framed out the interior of it. 1-bedroom house, small kitchen. I framed out the interior in 1 day by myself.
Yeah.
So I could have framed that whole thing nearly in a weekend by myself, and I wouldn't have needed a SkyTrack to help place the panels and all of that stuff. So right out of school, I was young and naive and very interested in alternative building products. I thought I was just certain we weren't going to be building homes out of wood 20 years later or 19 years later.
Yeah.
And to this day, wood's one of my favorite building products.
Right.
So I wanted to try something new, innovative. I'm very interested in low energy type products. Once again, engineers are as cheap of people you're ever going to meet. If I can cool my house for $100, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Or heat it or anything else. So that's what I was after. And, I didn't really feel like I got it with that system. So my next house, the next house, I was married. We were hoping to start a family.
Yeah.
And we needed something a little larger. And by the way, I still live within eyesight of the first house.
Mm-hmm.
I moved just a little bit further away, and I got smart and hired somebody to build this next house for me. I asked the builder to price two scenarios. I either wanted 2x4 studs with continuous exterior insulation, like 1 inch of insulation, or I wanted 2x6 studs with with an R19 bat in it.
Okay.
And he priced both, said it was essentially a wash, so I went with the continuous exterior insulation. And then once again, I was on a pretty tight budget, so it had to be a somewhat traditional home. So I just had fiberglass bats in the walls. I had OSB sheathing, and on top of the sheathing, I had 1 inch rigid insulation. You tape all the joints, and that's your WRB on the home. I've since been told that's not a great WRB, but so far this one's held up well. And then I had blown in insulation in the ceiling, and I think at the time code was R30. I asked them for R40. They told me how dumb I was, throwing my money away, and when they priced it, it ended up being like an extra $300 or something.
Yeah.
And the guy was like, "My gosh, I'm going to start doing this on all my homes."
Yeah.
So I did it, and once again, this was in 2012. And I knew this at the time, but more so now. There's a pretty widely accepted belief that you should have your ducts within your insulated building envelope.
Sure. And
mine are not. So mine are in the attic, as are many of the production built homes today. So it's still a lot of homes built that way. And but it's been a great performing home. Only recently did I get an electric bill over $200 in the peak of summer.
Wow. And
now my children are older, and we have a sprinkler system and a swimming pool, and the kids are in and out all the time. And nowadays, in August, I might have a $250 electric bill. It's for a 2,700 square foot house. 3-bedroom. So it's really performed well. My next house, I want to do a slight upgrade.
Yeah.
From that, it's not going to be much of an upgrade. I intend to insulate in the plane of the ceiling, or the rafters. Insulate the plane of the rafters.
Right.
I haven't quite settled on which system I would use. If we trusted, it'd probably be spray foam. If I stick framed it, I still like blown in bat insulation. I've always liked it. I like how quiet it is. When I walk on a job site, it feels like you're in a recording studio. When you walk in a job site with blown in blanket. Did I say blown in bats? I meant blown in blanket system.
Okay.
Bib system.
Yep.
And I will most likely use that in my walls. And then I'm really liking this zip system that we're seeing. I like the simplicity of the air sealing of it. I like that you can easily inspect it and find out that it's been done right. It's visual. Where before, with sheathing and Tyvek, it's really hard to know if you missed anything. And I still like continuous exterior insulation.
Yeah.
So I'm at a point in my life where maybe I could afford a slight upgrade over my last house. So, Zip R panels aren't inexpensive, but I believe in the system.
Yeah.
I think it's a good system. For as a compromise. There's better systems.
Sure.
Certainly. But this is a good one that I think we could probably swing. I'd probably go ahead and use 2x6 studs.
Yep.
Use some type of Zip R panel. And that would be where I start with my next home. It's terrible. My wife has totally different ideas on what a home should be, so we don't even have conversations about it because she cares nothing about these types of things.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I know what you mean. 100%. Yeah, and I'm actually thinking to do the same thing on mine. I have an older home, but I'm looking to do more of like a retrofit like that, where I think I have 1/2 inch foam insulation as my sheathing. I remodeled one of the bathrooms, and that's what I saw on the exterior was that 1/2 inch foam. It was foil backed. But then other parts of the house I think has plywood, maybe just for shear, the shear walls has 1/2 inch plywood. But yeah, I would love, I'm in the same boat. I like the Zip product. I think it's good, especially too, if you are on a budget and it's pretty bomber. If you do it right, you tape all your joints and roll them. It's a good WRB, and then you also have that continuous insulation I think it's a good retrofit option. So
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat as you are. I like that.
These are very strong homes too. I mean, a code built home is a strong. Some people kind of fuss about code. Code minimum. That's a cheap home. Well, the truth is, these are very strong homes. They weather a storm very well.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to take a Category 5 hurricane or tornado, but a high wind event, I feel completely safe in a home like that.
Yeah.
I see very few failures in them. It's going to pull off shingles and things like that. You might lose a window, but the home itself is going to be a pretty safe home. When was your home built that had this 1/2-inch foam insulation on it? When do you think?
I think it was. I want to say it was late 70s, maybe early 80s.
Okay, my dad's home, like I mentioned, he built it in 84. He put continuous foam insulation on the outside.
Yeah.
Is it interesting to you that they were building with foam back then, knowing it was a good building product, and here we are today twisting arms to try to get people to use continuous insulation on the outside of their home?
It's funny you mentioned that because I was just thinking that the other day. Yeah, it is kind of interesting that they used. But to me, it's like I didn't know if they used it just because, well, that was all that was available. So why the heck not? Or maybe didn't know any better. So, this is what we're just going to slap on the walls to seal up the envelope.
Well, like I said, my dad was an architect, and he actually practiced as an architect for a while before going into engineering. Not for a real long time. But he did it because it was energy efficient. And it was well known at the time. So it's surprising to me now that we have a hard time convincing people that it's a worthwhile investment in their home. Yeah. I think a lot of people are coming around to it. But I struggle with this notion, to take a step back. There's an architect I work for. He's nearing the end of his career. He'll retire in a few years. But I remember when LEED was a big deal.
Yeah.
And about the time I got out of school, LEED was really a popular topic. A lot of people were getting accredited in certain areas of LEED. And I called him to ask his opinion about it. I said, is this something, as a young professional that you think I should pursue? And he said, Whit, I have no intention of doing that. And that kind of caught me off guard. Like I said, I was this new to this business. I was wanting to be on the cutting edge of everything. With new products, new trends, new training. And he said, in my opinion, this is how we design already. He said, this is how I was trained. These are the things that I do. Mm-hmm. He said, we use locally sourced materials. We orient our homes to take advantage of sun and prevailing winds. Yeah. And we have long overhangs to protect our buildings. And we seal them up tight and we insulate them well.
Yeah.
And once again, I wasn't really confident in where I was at that time. I was learning. I was wanting to excel within the profession, and I was still trying to figure out how to do that. So that gave me some confidence to think, okay, well, I don't need to go get this accreditation in order to demonstrate to someone that I know what I'm doing. And it just takes time, so I just went back to what I was doing and kept grinding away at it. And I actually don't know what the status of LEED is. It might be well and thriving today. I'm not sure. But I see the same trends in other conversations. I don't really want to get off on the whole sustainability thing unless you do. I don't have a lot to say about it. But I feel about that like I do about LEED. You can't go to I don't go to award ceremonies, but I read
Sure.
what projects did well and why was this a successful project, and they're very often talked about being sustainable. And to me, I still don't know what that means to this day. I know what it's supposed to mean. I don't know that I quite understand it or agree with it. But the concepts they're using are things that we've seen used for a long time.
Yeah.
It's not some of these products are new, but particularly the mechanical ones. And Zip is a new product, but the idea is the same.
Yeah.
You insulate it well, you seal it tight, and you get a long, durable, well-performing home with low cost of ownership. And, you put a good product out there you can be proud of for a long time. So, and then that will serve generations.
Yeah.
So, it's, I don't know. I have a hard time not rolling my eyes every now and then when somebody presents this brand new concept to me that, as it turns out, your builder of your home in the 70s was using.
Yeah.
So.
No, I guess, to sum up, tell me a little bit, what do you do when you're outside of work? What do you do in your free time? What do you do for fun?
Well, at this stage in my life, it's mainly chasing children around.
How old are your kids?
I have an 11-year-old son, a 9-year-old daughter, and a 6-year-old daughter.
Okay.
So we're in the middle of baseball with my son, soccer with my daughter, and gymnastics with my youngest daughter.
Okay, wow.
And then my wife and I still try to find time as often as we can to sneak away together.
Yep.
You know, very fortunate to we still love each other's company and our little moments away together.
Absolutely.
So that's always important to us. But that's our first priority. I'm building something at every opportunity. I mean, I still am a builder at heart. There's still a part of me that I don't regret not being a builder. I still get to build.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm still a wannabe builder. You know, like I said, I still like to step on a job site. And this is not a joke. I was on a job site a week ago, and I was just standing there watching the framers work.
Yeah.
And the guy who owns the company, a friend of mine, well, he's become a friend, he walked up and said, "Whit, I can get you a tool belt if you want." And I said, "Man, you don't know how bad I would like to be up there working with those guys. I might not hang as well as they do, but
Sure.
I'd sure like to have a shot at it." So we have a small rural property that we hope to move our children to. You know, where we live is really growing fast. My wife and I grew up in a small school. We're hoping to move, you know, still close enough where I can still come into work.
Yeah.
You know, maybe not 5 days a week, but come in pretty regularly. And we're tinkering out there. It's kind of a homestead-ish concept. We're not full-blown homesteaders.
Yeah.
But I enjoy a lot of the aspects of that, of what those people do. You know, I like the idea. We have a garden at our home here.
Yeah.
We're trying to grow that into a larger garden. We're building a greenhouse. Putting in, you know, a larger kind of a rec barn, storage building, you know, for the kids to... you know, batting cage, basketball goal.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Something we can do in the wintertime when
fun.
we're cooped up in the house. So there's that. And then I've been really fortunate to have all of my neighbors. I live out in the Driftwood area, kind of by the Salt Lick. My neighbors out there, every one of them loves to tinker. One was a retired dentist who had an airplane hangar. He used to fly planes.
Oh, so cool.
Every tool known to mankind in there. And it was open to me anytime I wanted it. In fact, I rented a house from him when I was building my first house. So he gave me all of his tools, forklift, everything to work on my own house, and it just treated me so well. Next door neighbor beyond that has a steel fabrication shop, and then the next one beyond that has a wood shop.
Wow.
And the one with the wood shop, we fish quite a bit. Before I had children, I fished a lot. Now I fish. Now we pull up on the beach and look for shells mostly. Yeah. You know, we fish for about 30 minutes, and then that's the end of that.
Yeah, for sure.
But I had a larger, older boat that made for fishing at the coast, and my neighbor over there, his name is Roger Cedars. He had a rod building company and a fishing rod building. They didn't build rods; they rod building supplies.
Okay.
And he's the ultimate tinkerer. I mean, if you go over there anytime, he's going to be in there building slingshots, fishing rods. I went over there the other day. He was putting together a John boat for his grandkids, you know, putting a trolling motor on.
That's so cool.
He had a great wood shop, though, and I was telling him, I said, you know, I really want to try shallow water fishing. And he said, Whit, I'll tell you what, I've really been wanting to build a boat. I've got plans for one. He goes, I don't have time to do it. You know, I've got, you know, my grandchildren and everything else. He said, I want you to build this boat here in my wood shop, and I just want to help out however I can.
Huh.
So this was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. So I built this boat in a shop. It turned out really well. Poling skiff, you know, 18-foot poling skiff.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of meant for sight casting down at the coast. And it turned out so well. It opened up all these new fishing waters to us that we couldn't go to before because these boats run so shallow.
Yeah.
I ended up wanting to build a bigger one for the family, and my wife, you know, made many threats. If you do this, you know, you're not going to like what happens. Well, eventually, I built that one at home. I thought she'd appreciate that more if I was doing it in the driveway.
Right.
It turns out that wasn't the case. But so I, you know, built another boat. We use that boat a lot. Other things, you know, fish a little bit, hunt a little bit, you know, bench rest shooting. You know, I still enjoy shooting with the kids, just teaching them, you know, about those types of things.
That's so cool.
We have animals, you know, cows, horses, that type of thing. We ride horses a little bit with the kids, but so you know, it's pretty fun.
That is like a slice of heaven.
It really is. You know, I'm trying to enjoy every minute of it because my kids still think I'm cool, and I'm just on the verge of that not being the case anymore. So I'm just trying to relish, you know, every moment of this.
Yeah,
and it's been a lot of fun. So, but I have a hunch Dad's not going to be cool here really quickly.
Oh man!
A quick aside about my neighbor Roger.
Yeah.
he had his sons were tinkerers like him, rod building company. They were building boats over there. They were building shooting tables, and so the neat story about this is they eventually went on to start Yeti. So that was founded out of that same little wood shop over there.
That was his sons.
Yeah, that was Roger's sons there. So
that is so cool.
That's a pretty good success story.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I mean, it's fun to see what, like I said, just tinkering, trying different things. And eventually that company came out of there.
Wow.
So
that's so cool.
Yeah. It's been fun to watch that.
Man, what great neighbors to have. I mean,
well, that's another thing we didn't talk about. Is just how I spoke about how fortunate I was to have been exposed to the construction scene here in Austin at a young age. I grew up in just a wonderful area. Great neighbors. The house I grew up in is 5 miles from where I live now.
Yeah.
So I don't live on the same property or anything, but we're in the same vicinity. I went through Dripping Springs schools, K through 12. It was just very fortunate to have been raised in an area like this. So, and it's been fun to watch it grow. Now off my back porch, I'm seeing the Driftwood golf course go in. Yeah. And monster houses. So it's
man,
it's fun. A lot of neighbors are up in arms about it. But
I can imagine.
This is what we do for a living, and
change.
It's something that I enjoy. So I liked it when it was all countryside, and I kind of like watching these houses go up too.
Yeah, change is it's not easy for everybody.
Yeah,
but. Well, that's awesome, and I can't think of a better place to end. But Whit, I really appreciate your time and your knowledge and understanding of the industry, and so I appreciate you coming on.
Bonnie, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Whit.